I just want to start out with a thought. Because as pastors, as church leaders, we're often driven people. We're type A personalities. We have risen to the to the level of leadership that we've attained, not by being lazy, but by being hyperly active sometimes. I mean, and that activity can bleed into your family time, into your rest and recreation time. It can affect your health in bad ways that I'll talk about here in a little bit. Remember this phrase: don't kill yourself, because the church will do that for you. And I don't. Liz might want to edit this out. Don't kill yourself with busyness. The church will do that for you. 8 years ago, it's about this time of year, we were going through some things at church, and busyness was getting kind of out of control. But it wasn't just busyness. There were stressors. There were things that were worth worrying about. Had some staff issues, had some congregational issues, things that are common amongst all of us. And man, I developed a sore throat. Well, it's springtime. The pollen is thick. And man, it didn't take me much of a sore throat to go to the doctor. And I went to the doctor, and I went with a little itch in my scalp, but I didn't think much about that. With an ache in my ear, which kind of goes along with a sore throat, and a pimple on my face. Well, 30-something years old, I thought I was past all this, but evidently I wasn't. So I go in and see the nurse practitioner, and I tell her what I'm experiencing, because when if I get a sore throat, I want that shot, and I want the antibiotics, and I want it right now. And so I go in, I expected the shot, the antibiotics, and just send me on my way. She comes in and she takes a look at the thing on my face, asks me about the thing on my scalp, looks into my ear to what was aggravating that, looked down my throat, and she said, I'm going to get the doctor. It's not that hard. The doctor came in and he looked at it and said, no, I was 37, I guess. Yeah. He said, you've got shingles. I said, that's not possible. Everybody that I know that has had shingles is 70, 75 plus. I've never known a 37-year-old to get shingles. I said, what in the world? John, I tell you what, probably for some common reasons. I said, how is this possible? And he went through all the medical stuff about, well, if you've had, chicken pox as a child, the virus resides in your nerve endings and it can express itself when you get older. But the reason you're probably having it as a person in your 30s is because of stress. Your life and its circumstances has a way of anxiety and stress has a way of expressing itself through the deleterious effects upon your body. And it's interesting. We all need to learn to practice what we preach. My doctoral work, my DMin study was about Sabbath. It was about how Sabbath can be used as a means of leading in growing a congregation and growing church members spiritually in a holistic manner, respecting the Sabbath so that we get back to the primordial rhythm of God. We see Sabbath it predates the law. It predates the giving of the law at Exodus chapter 20, Deuteronomy chapter 5. It goes back to a creation rhythm that God instills for his people to respect. Sabbath is really, it's more than just an identification with God that we would take a day off. In fact, Sabbath is not a day off. I've got several books and people I want to refer to. One of them, and my thinking about certain individuals has changed, but their writing still is a little bit authoritative when it comes to Sabbath. Eugene Peterson, who wrote The Message, gave some good words about Sabbath that I looked at from my doctoral study. He says, an acute understanding of Sabbath is prerequisite to its practice. It must be understood biblically, not culturally. A widespread misunderstanding of Sabbath trivializes the designation of Sabbath as a day off. Sabbath is not a day off. It is inexcusable that pastors learned in Scripture and guardians of sacred practices should misname it as a day off. To say a day off is to bastardize Sabbath. Sabbath days are not without benefits, to be sure. Sabbath days are times when we have margin for relationships. But he says, however, this is not a true Sabbath. A day off is not a true Sabbath, but a secularized Sabbath. He says the nearly wholesale situation among pastors of a day off for a Sabbath is one more sign of an abandoned vocational identity. You know, there's some lies that we've bought into from our secular culture, from the business world. You know, I found myself all through my 20s and early 30s reading, outside of theology books, reading almost exclusively business books. Why? Because, well, as pastors, we need to know how to manage people. We run a congregation. We facilitate, you know, the organizing of a staff and deployment of a staff. And things from the business world just lend themselves naturally to our realm. And I was finding that I was adopting mindsets and models wholesale from the business world into from the secular world into the sacred world. Sabbath kind of helps us get away from that. Sabbath helps us get away from the lies, number one being that time is money. You've heard that. Kind of matters, right? We a lot of people calculate their worth by, you know, how much they make per hour. You know, what am I making per hour? As pastors, we probably make 12 cents an hour. You know, it's government should come in and do something about that. But God says something different. When God rested on the seventh day, He didn't say time is money. He says time is sacred. And, you know, as good Baptists, we sit down with our day planners and our calendars and our schedules, and when we see a blank space, we're compelled to fill it up with something. Committee meetings, ministry, good things that will help run the organization, but things that distract us from the sanctity of time. You know, we find our identity in being busy. The more we do, the better we think we are. But God says, listen, your value and your worth are derived from your relationship with me. And if we have eradicated all the solitude and silence out of our schedules and out of our people's schedules, you know, we don't do this just to ourselves, we do this to our people as well. Then we've lost our moorings, we've lost our bearings, we've lost our connection with that primordial rhythm where we find our rest in God. We've bought the lie that success means significance. Now, everybody here, you know, we get our batteries charged by being successful. Success leads to more success. The more we achieve, the more we succeed, the more we want to achieve and succeed. But, you know, success as far as budgets and bodies, it doesn't represent, it's really irrespective of discipleship. You know, we can do crazy things to draw a crowd, can't we? In our churches, if we'll admit it, and those people who are influential in our churches, they like a crowd, don't they? And they like it when they get to the business meeting, they look at the financial report, and there's more money coming in. They like that. But those aren't true markers of discipleship. It requires bringing people into a growing relationship with God that can only be done through the proper use of time, entering time as sacred, that discipleship is able to happen. It's not just that we're transferring information to them by preaching to them from the pulpit. We need to encourage them to take what they've heard from us, to take what they've read in Scripture, to meditate on it, to sit with it, to become practitioners of it and not just studiers of it. Success that is detached from discipleship is really a distraction in the church. It's really a sin. Our goal always has to be bringing people to a growing knowledge of Christ and a growing capacity to be able to follow Christ in discipleship. One of the things that I know that I've bought, I had bought wholeheartedly, and I still suffer in temptation in this regard, that the problems that we face as pastors, the challenges that are before us, we tell ourselves, well, I can overcome this, I can get past it if I just work harder. That's idolatry, isn't it? That's idolatry. When God rested, He invited us into His rest. When we rest, when we take ourselves out of the context of busyness, it shows an abundance of trust in God. The world is still going to turn on its axis, even if we're not at our duties, even if we're not at our desk, even though we might not be hovering over a commentary or seeing someone in the hospital. The seeing people in hospitals and the studying of the commentaries of the writing of sermons, there is no end. But it's of no consequence unless we ourselves have modeled a growing relationship with God to our people so that they too may learn to grow in God through the use of sacred time. And, the lie, more is better. Well, it's not. God could have gone on creating, gone on doing. He has infinite capacity, and He chose to rest. And on that day that He rested, He blessed it. Blessed it for our happiness. Not that we would always pursue more and more and more. That's the temptation. We have something innate about us that always wants more. But God said, enough. This is enough. When we get to the end of our week, we ought to be able to say, Lord, I'll trust You with what we have done together so that Your people will be able to feast on the Lord's day. They'll be able to feast, and we have worked, we've labored together, Lord. I'm going to trust You that this is enough. Sabbath is not about being lazy. Sabbath is about being intentional. It actually requires more of you to be intentional about wrapping up your work so that you can focus on God. It's kind of interesting. We have some Peterson gives some good models for how to Sabbath. This is a book called Working the Angles. It's a series on discipleship that he wrote. Some of you may have a copy of this. Some of you may not. The other book by Peterson that I brought, one that I've enjoyed immensely, is Christ Plays in 10,000 Places. He talks about Sabbath pretty broadly in this one as well as the one here. I never had anybody model before my eyes in my life how to Sabbath. I really didn't. You go to church on Sunday and you consider that Sabbath, but it's really a day where you're just as busy as you are on Monday through Friday. If you're in the secular world, he talks about his own personal practice of Sabbath. And I would hope that every one of you has an intentional practice of Sabbath. And he talks about how he gleans spiritual worth from this, but also how he invites the congregation to keep him accountable in this. Personally, I take Fridays off. Some of you may do the same. I just find that I wrap up my week well on Thursday afternoon and try to protect my Fridays so that I can spend time with my wife, my family. We can just rest together. We can engage in that time that is intentionally set aside. It says, Monday is my Sabbath. Nothing is scheduled for Mondays. If there are emergencies, I respond, but they're surprisingly few. My wife joins me in observing the day. We make a lunch, put in the day pack, take our binoculars, and drive away for 15 minutes to an hour away to a trailhead along the river or into the mountains. Before we begin our hike, my wife reads a psalm and prays. After that prayer, there's no more talking. We enter into silence and continue for the next 2 or 3 hours until we stop for lunch. So it's just permission. This is permission to be able to take off, to get away, to go where there's no cell phone reception, or if you can't go that far, just turn your cell phone off. It's to meditate and to pray and to read Scripture, not reading Scripture to extract a point from it, but to be transformed by it. Just to let God speak to you. He says, we return home in the middle or late afternoon. We putter around, do odd jobs, read. After supper, I usually write family letters. That's it. No Sinai thunder, no Damascus Road illuminations, no Patmos vision. A day set apart for solitude and silence, not doing, but being the sanctification of time. You know, that's what I kind of yearn for. It's what I yearn for being a pastor. It's what I really need to do. And he talks about informing his congregation about this. He says, you know, I let my congregation know from time to time, particularly my elders and my deacons, that Monday is my Sabbath day. It's not a day off, it's a Sabbath day. So when I'm Sabbathing, pray for me. And when you see me not Sabbathing, talk to me. Tell me you need to be about this. And it invites the congregation in a way where they can keep him in that Sabbath rhythm, but it gives them permission to encounter God in their own Sabbath rhythm. I think a study needs to be done. If anybody's working on a doctoral project, let me just give you this for free. I was never exposed to the schedule that our plant workers do, the DuPont rotation, the schedule. You know, that's perfect. That's a perfect schedule for keeping refineries and plants open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But it's irrespective of the rhythm of God that he created us to be able to enter into so that we might know him and enjoy him. I really wonder what that DuPont schedule has done to family life. I think there would be a really interesting study of how relationships have become strained because, you know, men are either away because they're busy or they're detached because they're tired. You know, it's no good to be in the same room with your wife and you're not emotionally present to her. You know, you might as well not be there, right? We have to be present, body, mind, and soul to those that to the one that God called us to love. You know, we're really living in a world where the Sabbath keeping rhythms are becoming more and more difficult to attain to. We're living in a world that doesn't value the things of Scripture, certainly doesn't value God, doesn't value the pattern of life that is set apart by engaging in work meaningfully for 6 days in order to rest and recreate and trust and sanctify time on the seventh day. There's some things that I think have helped me kind of put a Sabbath lifestyle into perspective. A Sabbath lifestyle means that I am going to keep balance, but it's a balance that honors God. It's a balance that doesn't deviate from God's plan. It's a balance that causes me to want to operate as well and effectively as I can, but not so much that I'm doing myself harm. All of you in your cars and trucks, when you're driving over here, you've got a tachometer, right? It shows you how fast your engine is spinning. Anytime that tachometer, the needle, do they have needles anymore, or is it all digital? Anytime that needle gets into the red, you're probably going fast, but your car doesn't like it, does it? Doesn't like it because it gets hot, doesn't like it because it puts stress on everything, doesn't like it because things tend to shut down if they're run in the red too much. Now, all of us, we need to be able to push ourselves into the red when circumstances dictate, right? But in order to reserve that capacity for when circumstances dictate, we need to find that balance in life. And I think Sabbath informs that balance. To me, for myself, I have a 75% rule. Any of you guys golfers? I'm a retired golfer. I retired some years ago after the last time I played in a scramble, and it was just a bad experience for everybody, including myself. But when I see a golf ball, especially on the tee box, I think, well, that driver is to get that ball way down there, and you get that ball way down there by hitting it hard, and you hit it as hard as you can. But every time I would hit it as hard as I could, the ball never went straight. Terrible slice. I don't know how many cars I've dented and windows I've knocked out because of a terrible slice. But when I would dial that swing back to about 75% capacity, I found that more often than not, it went somewhere in the vicinity of where I expected it. And that's how we need to live life, at about 75%. Don't run into the red, because when we run into the red and keep it there too long, it extracts a price upon us somewhere. It might be our physical health, or worse yet, it might be our relational health. It might be our relationship with our spouse, or a relationship with key people in our church, our ability to engage with others when they're down. You really can't effectively minister if you're emotionally and spiritually depleted. Sabbath makes sure that you have the emotional and spiritual resources to come to someone's aid, to be present to your wife and to your family. Running that tachometer about 75% of its full capacity is where you need to live at, because that's where you'll find the best balance in life. You're not being lazy and staying at just above idle, but neither are you running at full capacity all the time, because that full capacity really destroys your ability to have a ministry for the long haul. And your churches want you to have a long haul ministry. Guys that just go into a church and expect to be there a year or two, they can do a lot of damage. They can do a lot of damage. But a guy that goes to a church, goes to a field, and commits himself to the Lord and to that congregation, to being there for a career, will sow health into that congregation. They won't do things that will push that church too far, too fast, to its own injury and to theirs. They'll see the whole picture of a 20-year ministry, a 30-year ministry, a 40-year ministry, and they'll bless that church by committing to patterns and rhythms that will get them there. So 75% rule, an intentional day of rest. We schedule things. As planners and as pastors, we're good at putting out the project management type sheets where we know when things are going to happen. We schedule things that are important. Well, I think rest is important. I think rest, in order to relate with God and relate with the people that are most important to us, is important. So a day off shouldn't just be a day where we just kick the car into idle and take our hands off the wheel. There's an intentionality about Sabbath that says, this is the direction my rest is going to go. It's kind of an intentionality that says, I'm going to make sure that things are taken care of, so that when I cut my phone off, I don't have to be anxious about the things that my phone might have lit up about. Because a lot of those calls that might come in on Friday, they can wait till Saturday. They can wait till Sunday to deal with. There's, as pastors, we want to do all the good that we can, but there are things that we can't do if we allow ourselves to be consumed with the problems of the world, with the things going on in our congregation that can wait till Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. I'm just talking about a Friday, day of Sabbath. Sabbath helps us to, in a healthy way, differentiate ourselves from the people that we lead. In leadership, there has to be differentiation. There has to be objectivity. If one of my congregants, if someone in my church comes to me and let's say they're having a marital struggle, it's so tempting to enter into their struggle so much when their house is on fire that I catch fire myself. We have to maintain a healthy distance from their pain so that we don't consume it to our own injury. Because if we take on their pain to such a degree that it diminishes our ability to minister to them, we've done them a disservice. And we've done ourselves a disservice, and we've done our families a disservice, because we can't just leave that emotional pain at the office. We take it home with us, and we carry it around in our bodies in the form of shingles and other ailments that might come upon us. We allow it to distract us from, our greater ministry and the greater good that we're called to do. So Sabbath is a way of differentiating ourselves from the problems in our congregations and the problems in the world, so that we don't burn up putting out the fires that we're called to tend to. Sabbath helps us to cultivate those relationships and habits and the kind of contentment that is most conducive to living a life that honors God. It's really interesting. This was one of the principal books that I used to study for my doctoral project. Richard Swinson, medical doctor and a Christian. And I'd recommend, I was going to buy all of you a copy of this book, but on Amazon, there was only 4 of them left. I think this was written about 1990, so it's an old book, but it's not dated information. The book's called Margin. He defines margin as is having breath left at the top of the stairs, money left at the end of the month, and sanity left at the end of adolescence. And isn't that what you want? It's what I want. So this book is about correcting marginless living by incorporating God's Sabbath rhythm into our life. And it's an intentional Sabbath. And one of the, a good car metaphor, one that we've kind of built on already that he elaborates on is, how do we think about life in such a way that leads to the kind of Sabbath rhythms that honor God and brings health to our body, mind, and soul? He says, well, your car has 4 gears, on your shifter, and the first gear is park. We have to put the car of our body and our mind in park in order to contemplate. Now, we don't stay in park or we don't go anywhere, right? So there are other gears that we can use. Second gear. I can't really remember the time I put my truck in second gear, but it's there. It's available. Second gear, you don't go very fast. You don't make a lot of progress. You don't get from here to Houston in an hour. But you can't relate to people when you're driving 99 miles an hour down the road. Second gear is low gear. It's the gear for relationships. Having a Sabbath mindset allows you to be able to sit down with your family. And your mind's not thinking 2 days ahead or 3 days ahead or a month ahead. Your mind is present to those that are with you. And the same is true with congregational leadership. When you're leading people, you have to be present to people. To communicate, you have to sit with them and go at their pace and allow the relationship to grow while the vehicle of your life is in low gear. Third gear is drive. You have a big D for that. This is the usual gear for work and play. When we're doing our craft, when we're cultivating sermons and visiting people in the hospital, it's Mondays are the day I usually go see all the people in the hospital that I can get to. And man, sometimes there's nobody in the hospital. Sometimes they're stretched out from Beaumont to Houston and beyond. And those can be hectic days. I put it in drive and I go and I get stuff done. As type A individuals, this is where we want to live a lot of our lives, irrespective of the low gear that we're given in order to relate to others. It's kind of interesting. We find ourselves being very successful here, but there's another gear yet. It's the overdrive. Overdrive is the gear that is reserved for times that require extra effort. Hurricanes. You better find that that overdrive gear when the floodwaters rising, the winds are blowing, roofs off buildings and stuff. But you don't have the privilege of shifting into overdrive if you've neglected the park, or if you've neglected the low gear, the second gear. The temptation is, especially for high achievers, is to live their life as adrenaline junkies in overdrive. And they bring that same mindset, not just to their professional career, but into their congregational leadership, into their spiritual work, and into their family life. And you end up leaving a lot of people behind. And you end up having some wrecks along the way. This is a needful gear. You have to have it in your repertoire, but you can't stay here. Sabbath brings you back into park. It allows things to cool off, allows things to cultivate, allows time to heal and to restore, and so that we can find our identity first and foremost in God, who keeps all things running without our help. That's Sabbath. So I would commend a healthy reflection on Sabbath, but a dedication to the kind of Sabbath living that will give your people permission to engage in the Sabbath rhythms of God, that primordial rhythm that He gives us in the creation account. My favorite verse on Sabbath, Exodus 35:3. Do not light a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. To me, that kind of sums it up. If you're not going to light a fire, you better be intentional on those 6 days, so that you can truly enjoy. You're unhinged and unbound to be able to enjoy God on the day that God gifted you, when He blessed it and called it sacred. Amen. All right, Jim, you said something about question and answer time. I'm an open textbook.
Well, the bit about intentional, I also push in what Jesus talked about as far as not being anxious, not worrying. And you say, well, but I have to. No,
mm-hmm.
You have to tell yourself, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take the Sabbath. I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Absolutely. This is the first time I've been asked to talk about Sabbath, where I didn't compel myself to talk about it from the pulpit, so I want to thank Jim for the opportunity.
So how do you say no to a church that demands a lot from
you know what? It is difficult. I found myself in a position last week. I got called on a Friday. And wasn't our church, Ray, but the first church I pastored, a wonderful, wonderful, sweet, dear lady passed away. I was really close to her family, and it's a 4-hour trip. And you know what? I didn't have anything specifically booked on Tuesday. I could have gone, but at what cost? At what cost to me being able to engage with my wife that evening, to sit down with my kids, the 2 daughters I still have living at home, because I would have left at 6 a.m. and got back at 10 o'clock at night. I could have done that, but just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And it's interesting. I think as leaders we have to be very mindful that we cultivate the congregation's expectations. We really do. We are treated the way we allow them to treat us. And if we invite them into our Sabbath resting, I think they're being mindful that this isn't just the preacher, he takes a weekday off. No, it's not taking a day off. It's cultivating the spirit. It's a day of really getting close to God. That is not a work day, but a rest day. And we tell them, listen, if you have an emergency, there's Brother Ray, or there's a deacon, or your Sunday school teacher. Any other day, call me any hour on the clock. But on this day, help me to set it aside so that I can pastor here for a long time and well. And I think it'll make everybody happier. But it's something that doesn't come about in one conversation. It comes about through a series of conversations, maybe sermons, and inviting key leaders in the church to share in those expectations.
Jason, as you're shepherding in the church with either your staff team or lay leaders, how do you delegate in a way that guards your Sabbath and at the same time be watchful of theirs?
Yeah, that's a good question because everybody's a little different. Everybody needs either to be prodded or held back mindfully. I think in our church we've had a pretty good long history of long tenured staff members, and it takes at least 3 years to get to know a person, I think, especially a staff member. And, I've been there, it'll be 12 years this year. Dale Prudhomme has only been there a little while, but he's kind of cut from a similar cloth that I am. Brother Allen was. Our worship pastor had been there. Alan was there how long, Ray? 13, 14 years, long time. Our youth minister's been there 7 years, and Brother Henry's been there. He's in his 6th year. So, it really starts with the senior pastor, because the senior pastor has the most leadway in their own schedule, or they should exercise that kind of leadway. But by exercising your right to Sabbath, it invites others to participate in their Sabbath, whatever that day may be for them. It instills and inspires within them the kind of Sabbath keeping. And it's I would hate to have to sit down with a guy and say, hey, listen, I notice you're not taking any days off, because it probably wouldn't be that conversation. It'd be, hey, there's some failings that stem from this. And that's what you want to avoid. At our church as well, we have a 5-year sabbatical policy. After 5 years, the church offers a 30-day sabbatical, and everybody on staff except Dale, who's only been there a few months, has enjoyed a Sabbath. And my Sabbath, the first one, we hauled a trailer up to Colorado, threw our phones somewhere where we couldn't find them for a while, and really just my wife and I, we did things we would never do or never think about being able to do at home. I don't normally exercise. You can kind of see by my physique, I'm not a great exerciser, but man, we enjoyed our walks every morning. We read poetry. I'm not used to giving. I don't read a lot of poetry, but we would read. We picked up Scrabble. But we exercise different kinds of relational enjoyment with each other and with the Lord, because we read Scripture on top of a mountain. We would read things together. It was just really wonderful. I really appreciated it.
Jason, thank you for sharing this with us. I wish you would have shared it 40 years ago. Of course, we're all aware of the big theological battle over when the Sabbath is.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday.
Yeah.
Christian Sabbath on Sunday. Jehovah's Witness Sabbath. The Latter-day Saints, or the other groups that worship, even Seventh-day Baptists.
Yeah.
And so that's where we get locked in. And so I grew up with the idea that our Sabbath is Sunday, and so it's a very busy day for people like me.
Yeah.
And so then we struggle with not really having that time, and then being in single staff churches. I tried taking a day off, and people started dying on those days. So anyway, so I just quit doing it.
Shame on them.
Well, I know. It hurts. It really does. So anyway, you find yourself into this continuous rhythm here of not doing that sort of thing. So anyway, I really appreciate what you shared with us here, and so thank you.
Absolutely.
You hit a nail on the head for me, though. concerning how we identify ourselves.
Mhm.
I struggled with this after I retired for several months, and COVID hit, and there was the pandemic shutdown, and the opportunities to do some supply preaching wasn't there as a result of
Yeah.
that. And consequently, I struggled with who was I? Who am I?
Mm.
Because we identify ourselves with, when you meet a man, you say, "Oh, what do you do?"
Yeah.
So that's our identification, is what we do.
Yep.
And when we're not doing anything like that anymore, I'll just sit around the house and watch TV. That's a horrible reality.
It is.
So we struggle with our identity there at that particular point. And I think what you're talking about here can help bring things back into right focus
Mhm.
and a good balance.
I hope so.
I think it's going to happen one way or another, and sometimes it's a negative thing when it happens when you're not planning it.
Yeah.
But then God intervenes on times, and
Yeah.
my own personal, 4 months outside of that, I knew I needed it.
Yeah.
And after 23 years in full-time ministry, never having a sabbatical,
Mhm.
barely having, vacation was, we're grabbing everybody, we're gonna go visit your family,
Yeah.
or my family. It was never really a vacation where we just got away. It was just us. In 24 years of marriage, we've had 2 vacations where it's just my wife and I.
Wow.
And so the last 4 months, as hard as the last couple have been financially, it's been some of the best time for me, because I've been able to find some things that I like to do
Yeah.
that relax me.
That's a good
that get
testimony.
me to a place of where I feel like God can speak to me.
Yeah.
Because as pastors, we get so caught up in the day-to-day operation of being a good pastor,
Mhm.
that we kind of let our own personal walk kind of go to the side. And I'm reading the Bible because I'm studying for a message, or I'm
Yeah.
reading the Bible because I'm preparing for this or preparing for that, and not really. I think that's where you're talking about the Sabbath is connecting with
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we miss out. And as a testimony, don't let it have to happen on that term. Take those times.
That's right.
Take those times.
That's right.
And let me remind you that both Texas Baptist and GTBN have resources for helping partner with the church and financially resource that time away
Yeah.
for a sabbatical. And so if some churches, that's a new idea to them, they think of it, well, we give them 2 weeks vacation, what more do we want? So let me fight that battle for you, okay? But, and I think Ernie and our SBT rep would say the same thing, because this is crucial. And having that time to recharge and refocus. And so know the resources are there from your convention partners and from GTBN as well.
Yeah.
To make that happen.
That's for sure.
Do you perceive that this is definitely one of the weakest areas of my spiritual walk in life? I came from like a very, he's laughing right now. Everybody who knows me knows this is true. I came from a very overclocked industry.
Okay.
You know, and I tried to bring that same work ethic into
Yeah.
ministry. And everybody loved it until it starts having frayed edges.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
And I have a senior staff that's always telling me to like go home.
Mm-hmm.
And like trying to lock me out of the building and stuff. So that's a joke. But do you perceive this as being something you just gotta like tear off the Band-Aid and make yourself do it, or like can you see like maybe some ladder rungs that could help implement this?
Yeah, I definitely see the points of entry. It's if you just dive in, you'll find yourself lost. If you just say, "Well, I'm just going to stay in the house today," you'll go crazy. I think you take your energy level and you go do something that has nothing to do with church. Go to the beach, fish, hobbies. You know, I found myself hobbyless for years because I even lived on a golf course. I thought after I got my seminary degree, I have time for golf. No, I didn't, because I identified as a busy pastor. I never took the opportunity unless someone forced me to go play a scramble or something. And I think we take that in kind of intentionality, and we apply our energy to it, and we find something that we can do that's meaningful. And it's out of that meaningfulness that when we have success there, it lends itself to opening up the broader horizons of what Sabbath can mean for a person. So, it's if you're a high energy person, if you're a type A person, take that type A-ness to Sabbath. Type A-ness doesn't sound right. You might have to edit that out. that type A nature to an intentional rest. And I don't know. John Calvin played Skittles on the Lord's Day. Skittles is an ancient form of bowling, lawn bowling, and he was a type A guy. But he intentionally got away from it. Reading different kind of books. I would recommend. I want to read a bit of poetry to you guys. This is Wendell Berry, and I don't know much about Wendell Berry's background, but man, he's a heavyweight when it comes to Sabbath thinking. This book, it's been added to. This is an old book, A Timbered Choir. It's reflections on Sabbath, poems he wrote on Sabbath days, covering about 4 decades, a long time, but it's been augmented. It's a longer version on Kindle on Amazon now. But if you want a really interesting Jewish perspective on Sabbath, Abraham Heschel wrote a book, The Sabbath. Best thing I like about that book, it's short, but you will romanticize about wanting an expression of Sabbath that lives up to his understanding of what Sabbath is. Abraham Heschel, he's got some other works that are really, really good. But 2 things from Wendell Berry's A Timbered Choir. My favorite poem in this book is one of the longest. He's a naturalist and agricultural guy. Talks about, this poem is called The Farm, but just one little verse here. It says, "The land must have its Sabbath, or take it when we starve." I mean, we can see that in our lives. We need to practice Sabbath, or our spirits will starve. We need to invite our congregations to Sabbath, lest they starve. His first poem in here, this is my goal in Sabbath keeping, this first poem. And his form of poetry isn't roses red, violets blue, everything doesn't rhyme, but it just makes sense. "I go amongst the trees and sit still. All my stirring becomes quiet around me like circles on water. My tasks lie in their places where I left them, asleep like cattle. Then what is afraid of me comes and lives a while in my sight. What it fears in me leaves me, and the fear of me leaves it. It sings, and I hear its song. Then what I am afraid of comes. I live for a while in its sight. What I fear in it leaves it, and the fear of it leaves me. It sings, and I hear its song. After days of labor, mute in my consternations, I hear my song at last, and I sing it. As we sing, the day turns, the trees move." And there's a lot of other poems like this that are pretty heady, and pretty on point when it comes to Sabbath. But this first poem and the poem titled The Farm are 2 of the most instructive.